everybody. Done too many podcasts, and here's one more. A couple of years ago, had my old friend Gary Shapiro, the head of the CTA, best-selling writer, on the show, talking about how both political parties in the US, back then at least, are undermining America's greatest strength, innovation. Gary is Mr. American Innovation. He's the author of The Comeback, How Innovation Will Restore the American Dream. Author of all sorts of books on what he calls our ninja future. And he has a new book out, Pivot or Die, How Leaders Thrive When Everything Changes. Gary is joining us from Washington, D.C., where he lives. Gary, we were talking before, something happened this week in Washington, D.C. There was, I heard at least, rumor says, an election. Do you still stick to your thesis from the 2024 election that neither political party is particularly pro-innovation in America today?
Andrew, I did not know you were going to do that, but that date on there is June 2022.
So that was 2 years ago.
Right. So that was a different thing. I've written over 1,300 op-ed pieces, and I have to admit, I don't recall the thesis on that one, but it was, I think the innovation, the tech community has gotten some negative press with Republicans and Democrats, and they call it big tech. That's a moniker that's been pushed very hard by those that have been affected by big tech, like the broadcasting community, the motion picture world, the content community, even journalists themselves who feel disintermediated. And the truth is that when you dig deep, what are they talking about? They're talking about 3 or 4 companies which they have business issues with because they reach advertisers better. They get advertising that reaches people better. And it's disappointing to me. We're a trade association. We have 1,300 American companies as members. They're all over the country. They're not just Silicon Valley. And they employ literally millions of Americans. So when I would say that the moniker of big tech has been harmful. There's been all sorts of bad legislation proposed by both parties. The biggest one is Section 230 removal or change. Section 230 was allowed the internet to exist and created literally millions of businesses. It allows websites with user-generated comments or questions, which is something that, for example, those people that go live or leave their things up, and it's not only Google or YouTube or Facebook or Meta. It's also Nextdoor. It's Travelocity. It's TripAdvisor. It's all sorts of websites where we rely upon each other to get information, and it's decimating. And the Republicans.
Gary, this is a long-winded answer to a very short question. Yes or no? Do the political parties get innovation in America these days or not?
That's a different question than you first framed it as. Do I still believe what I wrote in there? I think that the parties are getting better. I think their focus on artificial intelligence in Congress has been very careful and studious. It depends on the issue. For example, the Democrats chose to run away from self-driving vehicles because the trialers and the unions were against them. They ended what the Obama administration and the first Trump administration had done, which was get us to the point where we could have cars go over state lines. We're not there yet. We have no national policy, despite the fact that a bill went through the House of Representatives almost unanimously several years ago. So what do I think? I think it depends on the issue.
Good Washington, D.C. response. It depends on the issue. And the issue, certainly for you in your new book, is unambiguous. Pivot or die. Do we talk first, Gary, about pivoting or dying? What exactly does that title mean, pivot or die? Quite literally, if leaders don't pivot, will they die?
Well, it's like the chicken or egg. You could argue which came first, but as a human species, certainly this goes back to genetics. Either, you do things that you survive and then you reproduce, and then those genes are carried forward. And that's the reality is that's where we are with business. COVID was a forced pivot. It forced almost everyone in the world to change what they were doing. It forced businesses to change. And a lot of positive things came out, a lot of silver linings to that dark cloud. And that's been good. And that's what the book really starts and talks about, a number of pivots that companies made forced. But there's also startup pivots. There's other pivots.
What is a pivot? It's a word that's was very popular in Silicon Valley for a while. I don't hear it as much now. What do you mean by it?
A pivot is a change in direction. You could talk about basketball in the 70s and 80s and a lot of pivots, or there's pivots in football, pivots in American football and soccer or football globally. It was a sporting term, which turned out it's just a change in direction. I spent a lot of time talking to people about the decisions they make in life, especially younger people, and they're focused on agonizing over things which really aren't that important in the scheme of things, whether it's your first job or what college you go to.
What's your, Gary, you and I have known each other a long time. What's your great pivot? I mean, I always associate you with the Consumer Trade Association.
Consumer Technology Association.
Sorry, Consumer Technology Association.
And CES. And CES, don't forget that, Andrew.
Of course, where you and I have done all sorts of things. You've got an upcoming one. We'll talk about that January of next year. But what in your life is exhibit A for a successful pivot? And when should you have pivoted and didn't?
Well, that's a really searing and important question. It could take up 2 hours. I would say I pivoted from being a lawyer to being a CEO was a pivot, because although I loved law school, I was unique that way. Practicing as a lawyer in a big law firm is pretty tedious, and billing time when you're a very fast worker is kind of degrading and probably not as fair to the client as you would expect. So I liked having one client, and I fell in love with this world when I went to my first CES as a consultant to this association.
What year was that?
First CES was 1981 or 1982. I'm a little confused about which one. Bottom line of it is,
you went to the first one in 81.
My first one. The first CES was in 1967. I did not create CES.
Yeah, I think my first one was about 96.
Wow. Well,
when the high-end audio was still in, the other end of the old end of town.
Yeah, so that exposed me to the joy of a trade show, a 5-sense experience where competitors are side by side showing how they want to be shown to the world. And I found it really exciting, and I found what they were focusing on, which is better sound with CDs at that time, VCRs, which were under legal attack by Hollywood, as well as a range of other products, better TV sets, personal computer was big, video games. And now that's morphed into focus on products like healthcare technology, solving fundamental problems in healthcare, food and water technology, clean water out of the air, food close to home, food that, and mobility, which is changing in so many different, it's just not cars.
So when did you become the president of the CTA?
Oh, is this a history exam?
No, I'm just curious in terms of this pivoting narrative. How long have you been
I believe it was 1995. I became president of the Consumer Electronics Manufacturers Association.
So why haven't you died? I mean, the subtitle of your book, Pivot or Die, is How Leaders Thrive When Everything Changes. But you've been running the CTA for almost 30 years now.
So it's not Pivot and Die, it's Pivot or Die is the name of the book, Andrew. And I haven't died because I find this the most exhilarating, challenging, fun, important. It's like the one job I think I'm good at.
But in all seriousness, Gary, the point
I keep redefining the job.
Well, the point of the book is that you don't always have to change your job. You just,
absolutely not.
Even if you have the same job, but you do have to pivot, right?
Well, I've changed the name of the organization a few times, but yes, you do have to change what you're doing. You have to do something that you're excited by, that you look forward to doing each day. But you also have to recognize that if you're in a business and your competitors, they're looking at the same environment that you are, and they're changing what they're doing. So sometimes they change in lockstep, in unison, because they're all looking at the same thing. They assume no one else is. That was the pre-COVID world. In the COVID world, I think what's happened is that basically people went in different directions. They thought more strategically, especially many of the Asian companies. and they're doing different things now. There's not a lot of copycatting products that you'll see at CES. And, there's other factors out there. There's new technologies which have come along, certainly new platforms. Apple's dominance in creativity has been very important, as has Samsung's and Sony's. There's a lot of things have changed in just the last few years. And now with generative AI.
Who is the, Gary, who is the Michael Jordan of corporate pivoters? Is it Steve Jobs? Who for you encapsulates what it requires to pivot endlessly and be successful? Pivot and live, in other words, instead of
I will say that there's three people which seem very similar to me at this moment. They could fall under that, and it would be Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Donald Trump. Each of those people have a set of skills in terms of creativity, which is amazing, and innovation, and doing things different, and breaking out of the status quo. And their natural inclination is to do it differently and do it in a way which makes a splash. They don't feel bound by certain social conventions that the rest of us feel bound by. I'm trying to come up with the politest way of saying that possible. And that's but they're phenomenally successful in what they do. I mean, for 4 years as president, Donald Trump did things differently. And, it caused a lot of fear and loathing. And I don't want to get into politics here because that's not what this is about. But, this election is so fresh that you have to look at it and say, wow, he really shook it up.
So we got Jobs, Trump, and Musk. I think one thing that we could say about all three is they're not easy men. They're of course all men. That may be interesting in itself. Maybe we can talk about that. Maybe you can come up with a woman who pivots well too. But they're not, even their supporters, even their biggest fans would agree, they're not the easiest of people to work for. Is that a good or a bad thing? Because they control one way or the other. Trump's in charge of the new American administration. Jobs headed up Apple with a lot of success, but also failure. And of course, Musk is a very controversial figure at Tesla and X and SpaceX. So is evidence of a successful pivoter someone who isn't a lot of fun to work for?
I don't think that's evidence at all of a successful pivoter. I think it's the decisions you make and how you make them. Can they be done with a little more sweetness and sugar and still get the same result? Absolutely. But, Steve Jobs was exceptional. He created this amazing company. And he had some failures, as every one of them has had. And he turned it around. And Walter Isaacson has actually written books on two of them, Jobs and Musk, and I've read them. And my view of Musk changed upon reading the book.
Yeah, Walter's been on the show. Maybe his next book will be on Trump.
I was just thinking that. That's a great question to ask him. There's 5 companies that Musk is doing, and arguably every one of them has had some degree of major success. And now, in a sense, he also pivoted by shifting to politics. And I don't know if you could say he made a difference or not. You could debate that, and Trump has had a number of businesses and he shifted to politics as well. So,
although some people might say about Trump that he's been I don't know if you saw The Apprentice, but a lot of people argue that he wasn't a particularly successful businessman. He bankrupted a number of his companies. Wait
a second. Whoa. I've seen The Apprentice. I wrote a column about it.
What did you say? What did you think about it?
I think it's one of the best programs on television.
No, the movie. There's a new movie about Trump.
Oh, I'm sorry. I had written an op-ed about The Apprentice, and Donald Trump contacted me about it. I think it portrays business great. I haven't seen a movie called The Apprentice. I'm sorry.
So we've got Trump, Musk, and Jobs. What about coming back to a female? Is it a bit of a male thing, Gary, to pivot all the time?
Absolutely not. I would actually maybe even make the case that women are probably better at it in some ways. I give a number of examples in the book. One of them is the CEO of Best Buy. Within 3 days of COVID having U.S. national importance, she switched every Best Buy store to customer pickup. She made a pivot that was huge, and it really put Best Buy in a good position for several years. and I'm sure there are other examples as well, but I've never looked at this as a gender-based phenomena, because I work with a number of wonderful executives that pivot all the time, including the women who most of our employees in executive and other levels are women here, and they've run the entire CES at the top levels and one below. So I think women, I know it's not politically correct to say that there's different skill sets, but for what we do, where you have attention to detail, multitasking, dealing with people that are competitors and maybe disagreeing, reducing tensions in a room, delivering on what's promised. My observation in life has been that females are
Do you think
really
that
good at that.
women pivot differently? I know you're married to a very successful doctor. Do you think women pivot differently from men, or you can't generalize?
I can't generalize on that. That's one thing I think, since we mentioned three people who may not be as sensitive to they may not have the emotional intelligence to be sensitive to others' feelings. I'd say definitely emotional intelligence and empathy are important, strong traits. And generally, I have noticed, in my view, without any research, that women are better than men at it.
I don't want to turn this into a political.
Yeah, but you just did.
No. I got another follow-up, even worse question that you can.
Oh, great! Hit me with your best shot answer. You always
Just after
do.
the election, do you think that one of the reasons why Harris lost the election was that she didn't pivot enough?
I don't want to go there. I have no idea. That's a much longer discussion, and
We'll have to have
I have not revealed who I voted for. I am not a Republican.
I didn't ask that, Gary. I just wanted to know whether you.
I don't want to hit a person down.
The book is called "Pivot or Die," and Harris died, so maybe she didn't pivot enough.
She didn't die. I think she was put in a position of enormous responsibility, and she ended up doing a much better job as a candidate than a lot of people envisioned. But she was dealt a very tough hand, and I think she rose to the occasion. The fact that the end result didn't favor her when she had, she was being loyal to President Biden and an economy which was tough and inflation was high, and that was the number one issue, that and immigration. I think she did a great job personally.
Gary, you mentioned younger people earlier in the conversation. Is there a generational quality to the book? Are you suggesting that perhaps younger people, a lot of young people you deal with both within the CTA and people who come to CES and you're associated with, do they need to understand the value of pivoting more?
No. I don't see that. I see a lot of generational differences. I'm happy to talk about it on other subjects, but in terms of the ability to pivot, part of what inspired the book really is it's a business advice book, but it's also a personal advice book. And what I started to say before we went in a different direction was that there's only a few decisions you make in your life which are super important, and the others are kind of random, like what school you go to or where you live or who you marry or things like that. But who you marry is important. Whether you have kids is important. Whether you commit a major felony is important. And whether you do something terribly unsafe for yourself is important. The rest of the decisions you learn from those decisions. And that's what makes, I think, the US so strong, is that we recognize that failure in startups and failure is actually a learning experience, because success is often not a learning experience. People become arrogant with success. They're not paranoid. They're not willing to change. And they're stuck on their formula. And that's why small companies are really good. But in terms of younger people, my message to them is, experience a lot of different things. You're not mature enough to make the decisions you really need to make on, what you're committing your life to and what inspires you until you're at least in your 20s or 30s. And that's, you really understand yourself and you should figure out what gives you energy. So I see a lot of angst by young people.
Yeah, I certainly tell my kids that. You made an interesting point, Gary, that we only make a few important decisions in our lives. But isn't the problem is that we don't know when and what those decisions are? So we make many decisions. Sometimes they seem really important and they're not. Sometimes they are very important and we don't give them much thought. So how do we know what the big decisions are in terms of your thesis in Pivot or Die?
Well, I talked about what the big decisions are, and the decisions do define the arc of your life. And some of them are just by necessity random. And we can't control who we're born to or how we've grown up, we can't control anything to this the point in time you're in, but you can control the future. So my view of life is that you have to look towards the future as much as possible, but learn from the past. And you reach a certain point, and perhaps I'm at now, where you want to impart that wisdom to others. That's the idea for this book. But in terms of what the important decisions are, there are decisions with ramifications that are seriously important, but they're very few. And yeah, there's a lot of luck and happenstance. But my point with everyone is, wherever you are right now, like let's take someone I have an enormous amount of respect for, is Ivanka Trump. She was born to wealthy parents, schooled well. And the question is, a lot of people don't like her father. And she was being judged and treated extremely unfairly, considering everything she's done with her and Jared and how they've made a difference in the world during his administration. And they were volunteers to boot. And yet, it's what she did with it. She made the world better, despite her circumstances. She's not a partisan. She's not, and she, in my view, was the one who made all the difference in doing some great things like apprenticeship programs, entrepreneur programs, women's programs, while in the White House. That's changed people's lives. And she chose to use that moment in time to help out. And so when I see people criticize like her unfairly with poor quotes that are just like her meeting with at the G7 was just totally out of context and wrong. She was the one who invited to be the keynote speaker, and all of a sudden she's criticized for talking to heads of state who were there to hear her speak in the audience. So I just have empathy for some of the people I know that are treated unfairly. And I also think we all make decisions in our lives, and we have to make the pivots that are best for us, but they should be thoughtful pivots.
Yeah, sometimes pivots are painful. I mean, you bring up Ivanka Trump. She clearly made a pivot in this year in moving away, at least, from public association with her father's political career.
Yeah, but she was there the other night, on stage with him because she loves her father and will not do anything to hurt him, and because she's loyal to him, which is another thing to, I think, respect, that she's never been quoted as saying anything bad about him, and she's been loyal as a daughter, but she's been good for the country because, by all accounts, she was very important and helpful in the White House, below the radar, and also working on the project she worked on.
You break pivoting down, Gary, into different types of pivots in the book. You talk about the startup pivot, the forced pivot, the failure pivot, the success pivot. If there's only one pivot, though, that people should remember, if they don't have the opportunity to read the book, what is it? What is the key pivot?
I thought you were going to tell me, well, it depends on what situation. And if you're a startup, you have the flexibility to do things that big companies can't do. And you should recognize that that's a competitive strength. You can move super quickly. And there's all sorts of examples I give in the book. But if you're a big company, like during COVID, the forced pivot forced a lot of companies to pivot quickly. And you saw leaders that came out that were strong, and you saw those that weren't. And then, there's the success pivot, which is really important because a lot of successful people, and I fall into this myself sometimes, you think you're freaking smart because you're lucky. And a lot of things in life are timing, and you just happen to hit on something randomly. But you're really not that smart, probably. You're just pretty lucky. So you got to be paranoid and look, if you just think you're going to rest on your laurels for the rest of your career. And Jeff Bezos, I'll never forget when he walked in he was a speaker when all he had was an online book thing that was doing really well, and becoming dominant. And he walked in and he showed this device to our group. It was the Kindle. Like, what are you doing? I was thinking, why are you crazy? Why are you going to go compete with yourself? It was brilliant. Same thing he did with cloud computing. He figured it out and went to this new era that gets them more revenue than anything else they're doing. So you got to give credit to someone who's willing to be super successful and then willing to just drop it, and go shift in a different direction. And there's a lot of people who have changed careers and done that, in a sense, like Arnold Schwarzenegger is an example of someone, amazing movie career. Before that, he had an amazing career as the world champion bodybuilder. And then he shifted to politics and governor, and he was actually a great governor. And if he was a U.S. citizen, he might have been president of the United States. But he didn't, the Constitution didn't allow it. So you look at certain people like that and like the pivots they've made, And it's like, wow, that's courage. And immigrants are great pivoters. If you think about the United States as a country,
Well,
like
immigration is in itself a giant
the
pivot,
ultimate pivot,
isn't it?
like you pivoted and came here to the United States. But a lot of people, that's what makes the U.S. so strong, I think, is that we're an immigrant mentality here, and we have diversity that encourages innovation in itself. And
I
that's
mean,
a
you remember
great
that book,
strength.
Startup Nation, about Israel? Maybe your next book should be called Pivot Nation.
Maybe. Thank you. Andrew, you were the first person to criticize technology companies that I've ever been with, and I thought you were crazy. And I'm not saying my
And now
views.
you've got to admit, I wasn't crazy.
Well, other people have certainly adopted a review. I think you're wrong, but I don't think you're crazy.
You talked about Jobs, Trump, Musk as the classic pivoters. But one who comes to mind is a surprising one. The man who took over from Jobs at Apple, Tim Cook. He always seemed to be, before he came to power, seemed to be, if not a bureaucrat, certainly the guy who made the trains run on time. But Cook has successfully, I mean, he's obviously pivoted his own career, and he's also built Apple up as an even more successful company. So the Tim Cooks of the world can pivot, can't they, Gary? You don't have to be a madman like Jobs, Trump, or Musk to be a good pivoter.
Well, certainly the three you mentioned there are entrepreneurial pivoters.
Yeah, and those are the ones you brought up. You said they are your three classic pivoters.
Tim Cook definitely is. I think you described him well. He's. I don't think anyone expected Apple to continue to do so well once Jobs passed away, but he's taken them to new heights. He's done a great job. Also, if you could, Microsoft is another example. Actually, if you want to talk, Bill Gates was the guy, and then there's some hiccups there, and now they brought in someone who's done a great job with Microsoft. And there's so many examples you could think of. Is that sometimes the quiet caretaker comes in, and there's quiet strength there. Some people are great with the media and flashy, and they're phenomenal marketers, and others, they do more than make the trains run on time, but they have it's especially with these big companies, which the skill of listening to other people and recognizing good contributors and good ideas is something that perhaps they're bringing to the game as well, because no one CEO could do it by themselves. You have to find the talent and listen to that talent and trust that talent, but also know when to override them. And that's a skill that every CEO probably at some point doubts themselves on.
Do you have negative models? You talked about hiccups at Microsoft. Of course, the man who took over Microsoft from Gates was Steve Ballmer, who I think most people would agree failed. I mean, he was, in his own way, a very dynamic, loud figure. He still is, but he seemed to fail to pivot the company. Are there negative models in your mind of leaders who failed to pivot?
Well, certainly if you look at certain companies like Eastman Kodak or Blockbuster, I mean, there's some classic Circuit City in a sense. There's some classic companies out there which just didn't change. Now at Circuit City, there's a lot of leaders, and I knew them, which tried to pivot to new technologies that just didn't work. Same thing there's a Radio Shack example. I mean, I've met more.
Radio Shack's a very good example.
And, they had the battery thing going, and it was a cash cow, and that didn't sustain them. There's a number of leaders that tried to invest in different things, and they didn't work. And you can look at any company that's pretty much gone away and say their leaders failed to pivot. They might have pivoted. They were failed pivots. I mean, look, when you're throwing a Hail Mary pass, most of the time it's not going to get caught, but sometimes it does. And that makes all the difference. As happened just recently on the weekend in football. Hail Mary pass was caught.
What about Ballmer, though? Does he teach us something in Pivot or Die? Perhaps
he's not mentioned in the book.
About the volume of your act.
Steve's a guy that's impossible not to like, and I've spent too much time with him not to say anything negative. But it just may be timing. Bill Gates was such a strong figure, and there's also product life cycles. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about why Microsoft has succeeded or failed. I just know that they're succeeding now. They have a business model. There's a lot of things in how products and when products are hot that's just random of the marketplace. I mean, it's just.
Gary, what do you make of the AI revolution? I mean, you didn't include Sam Altman. He seems to be also a supreme pivoter. And currently, it seems the two dominant American players in AI are Google and OpenAI, very different kinds of companies with very different strategies and leadership. How would the Google and OpenAI leadership and the companies, how do they fit into your arguments in Pivotal Day?
You're right about Sam Altman. Great pivoter. Shifted. If you look at his career, it's been amazing. He's made some great decisions. There's been some hiccups along the way. I mean, there was that blip when they had, I don't know, 2 or 3 CEOs in a weekend, it seemed. Things happen. The structure of the company is kind of weird. I know that Elon Musk has some strong views about that. It's not been a perfectly charmed life. He's worked and he's had the foresight. I try not to get too much into the business decisions. I try to get into the lesson of the pivot and why it worked in the book.
I don't want to keep on coming back to the gender issue, but there are people in Silicon Valley who argue that the women don't get the top jobs. So they're the ones who always get the blame. You think of someone like Sheryl Sandberg or Marissa Mayer. Why, you brought up the male leaders. It doesn't seem, I mean, who is your model female pivoter?
Well, Sheryl Sandberg is a great pivoter. I kind of disagree with you on that in a number of ways. I first met her when she was working in the U.S. government for a cabinet secretary, Larry Summers, and she's always been a star. And she pivoted from working for government to taking on a job with an obscure company, and she pivoted, and then she pivoted and she wrote this great book about women, really well researched. I found it really affected my life. And now she's pivoted again. I mean, she's terrific. Marissa Mayer also, she started as a junior person at Google, moved up quickly, and then she went to Yahoo. I think she was treated unfair. I actually had this discussion today about her. She was treated so unfair with someone who worked at Yahoo and at Uber. And the context is that she was treated so badly when she acquired a lot of companies, and a lot of them didn't work out at Yahoo, but she was drummed out while she was pregnant with twins in a difficult pregnancy. It was the meanest thing, the press. And I just think that I wish I'd spoken out more. I think I tweeted about why it was wrong. Same thing with Travis of Uber. His parents were in a car accident. One of the parents died, the other was seriously injured. And for 3 or 4 weeks after that, it was all about Travis losing his job. I think at some point we have to be human, and we have to speak out against injustice, against other human beings that are being treated, even if they're famous CEOs, and say, this is wrong. The way we treat presidents' kids there's kind of a culture there of acceptance, of not outing them. But when someone's going through a life traumatic change, you let it up instead of being, frankly, sharks in the water. And that's, I don't want to sound like I'm just decrying major media, and this is business media, but it's just wrong. And I think both, look what Travis did. I mean, he ended up trying to pivot a couple of times as well. But
I'd known Travis for many years. He pivoted many times before.
That's
Uber.
true.
So Uber was the
right.
climax of his pivoting life. Finally, Gary, not everyone can be Travis Kalanick or Marissa Mayer or Sheryl Sandberg or Steve Jobs or Donald Trump or Elon Musk. What's the lessons for people in your book, Pivotal Day, who aren't big-time corporate leaders? Are we all, in our own way, in our family lives, in our friendships, in whatever teams we work in our working life, are we all in an odd way leaders? Can we all learn to pivot?
Great way to end the interview. I agree with that. And then that's really the point of the book, is that we all have limited time on earth, and how we choose to spend that time is based on the decisions we make. So that's why, I want everyone to love their job, because I think you spend most of your waking hours and even, either at the job or thinking about your job. And that's why I encourage people to find out what really they look forward to each day and then try to pursue that. So yes, we're all pivoters. And it's because we're making decisions every day. And what I would urge people, even if they don't read the book, is to think about where you spend your time of your life And is that what you want to do? And that's something that's really important because, what is it you want to accomplish in your life? What is it you want to do? And that's important for, I think, just about everybody, whether it's you want to have great kids and raise them and spend your time doing that, or whether you want to, create a company and start, or you want to be a social worker and help people. It's what gives you the energy, and make a conscious decision about it.
Well, and let's end, Gary, with CES, January 7th through the 10th. If you haven't been, I would certainly suggest you go. Why should people go this year?
Well, it's going to be an amazing event. We have the hottest company CEO in the world speaking from NVIDIA. We're using the Sphere to have the number one transportation CEO, the CEO of Delta Airlines, who I might add wrote the foreword to my book. He's speaking. Plus, there'll be over 4,000 exhibitors in all sorts of categories. It inspires you. If you go there, you start the year off great. And if they're listening to you and they're connected with the tech industry, they're welcome to come. We have a registration on our website, obviously, and it's worth looking at. And we'll be doing a lot of streaming also, some of the main speakers. We'll have over 1,000 speakers
You
there.
used to invite me to speak. You didn't invite me this year.
You're invited to come as a famous journalist. I figured you were too busy doing podcasts, Andrew. If you have more podcasts than anyone I've ever met.
Touche. Well, Gary Shapiro, my old friend, author of a new book, Pivot or Die, How Leaders Thrive When Everything Changes. He is my personal model of how to pivot. So, Gary, congratulations on the new book. And no doubt there'll be many more pivots and many more appearances of Gary Shapiro on Keen On. Thank you so much, Gary. Keep well, and we'll talk in the new year.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Keen on the scene, he's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen, making waves, break the routine on the Keen On show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.